And the story we're going to start in is going to be in Matthew chapter 8, verses 1. If you have a Bible, you can follow me along. If not, we got it on the screens for you this morning. And it's going to be Matthew chapter 8, just 4 verses, 1 to 4. And we're going to be reading there. That's going to be the basis of our story today. So it says like this. It says, when he came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and kneeled before him and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. I am willing, he said. Be clean. Immediately, he was cured of his leprosy. Then Jesus said to him, see that you don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them. God, I just ask that you speak to us this day in your word, and let us see what you want us to see. Let us see how Jesus' life affects our life. So, this situation, I've heard this story before, and this situation is interesting. This story is present in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all three of the Gospels. And each of these, there's 4 of them, but, John is a little weird. John was always the odd man out of the Gospels. You got 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And John talked about himself a lot. He talked about himself in his book in the third person, calling himself the disciple who Jesus loved. You know, he knew that Jesus loved him, and he wasn't afraid to tell anybody about it. But we're going to be talking about Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and this story is present in all 3 of the Gospels, and it's really interesting. In the book of Matthew, we learn that the context of this story is right after Jesus just finished preaching the greatest sermon, his greatest sermon of all time. It spans from Matthew chapter 5 to Matthew chapter 7, and it's famously known as the Sermon on the Mount. And so Jesus is preaching on the mountain, and he's talking about all kinds of things. The core of what he has to talk about to them is love. Behind everything that he talks about, it's love. Whether it's how you treat people, whether it's how you live your life, whether it's how you give, whether it's how you witness, all of it has to do, the core of everything he has to do falls in the commandments of loving God and loving people. And so Jesus finishes this sermon, and he comes down from the mountainside, and this is where we find ourselves. And so he's preaching, and the crowds are following him into town. You know, they're so amazed by how he has been teaching. If you look at Matthew chapter 7, the last verse there tells us, and the people were amazed because he taught with such authority and power, not like any of the teachers of the law that were there. And so they're following Jesus because they're astounded by this man. He's not like anyone they've ever met. He's not like anyone they've ever heard before. He was like the all-star preacher of the day. They didn't want to go to the other rabbis and teachers. They wanted Jesus. And so Jesus is walking into town, and all of a sudden, he is approached by this man with leprosy. And so leprosy in the days of Jesus could have meant a few different things. We know that a lot of people think of leprosy, it's the disease that messes with your skin. It causes nerve damage, and your skin starts to rot and fall off. They can't feel, and so people often lose limbs and other stuff. I don't want to get too graphic here this morning, but this is a disease. But in Jesus' day, leprosy was used to describe a lot of different diseases. And so we don't know exactly what kind of leprosy this man had, but if we look in the book of Luke in this story, Mark. If we look at the book of Mark in this story, no, I'm wrong again, it's Luke. Yeah, y'all bear with me. I got my passage. I got them all here, I don't know why I'm getting them mixed up. But in Luke chapter 5, verse 12, he says like this, and Jesus was in one of the towns, and a man came along him who was covered with leprosy. He was covered with leprosy. So it wasn't just like a basic disease. It wasn't just he had a rash or anything like that. It was something that was affecting his whole body. And so this man was in a desperate situation. He didn't know what to do. And the reason why is because how people that were lepers were treated in this day. Something that we don't think about much often, but we know the famous, or I hope you know. If you don't, it's okay. Look her up. Google is a thing. Mother Teresa, she was a famous nun who lived among leper colonies in India. And these people, they had the leprosy that would damage their skin and body parts. They would lose body parts and things like that. And she lived among these people and ministered to these people. And so we could say, we don't know, but it maybe looks like this man may have been affected by that. And so lepers like that in this day and age, in Jesus' time, they were outcasts from society. They weren't allowed to live inside the cities. The Bible the cultural history tells us that they had their clothes burned. They burned down their houses. They kicked them out of town. They weren't allowed to live near their family or friends. Nobody. They couldn't be near people. And if they had to be near people, they had certain other rules they had to follow. They had to dress like they were mourners, so they had to dress all in black. They had to know that was what marked them, their clothes. And not only that, they had to yell out, "Unclean," when they were near anybody. That's crazy to imagine. They were ostracized from society, and nobody wanted to be near them. And so this man is taking a risk in this story. He has decided that his desire to see Jesus and have Jesus intervene in his situation is more important than what other people might think of him. It's more important than that. And so this man, this is part of our situation we're in. This man has leprosy, and he's going and he's looking for people. He's looking for Jesus, not people. He's trying to avoid people more than likely. But so there's more to the situation. In Mark chapter 1, verse 40, it tells us, I'm sure I got this one right this time. In Mark chapter 1, verse 40, it tells us this. A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Verse 41, Jesus was indignant. I didn't know what that word meant. I'm going to be honest. I had to look it up. It means angry. Jesus was angry. And so, at first glance, you look at the story and it's like, well, what is Jesus angry at? You know, it doesn't make sense. Why would Jesus be upset in this situation? You know, he was, I mean, I don't know. He just finished preaching a sermon. Maybe he was hungry and wanted to get to the nearest food restaurant. I don't know. Did they have restaurants back then? Maybe. He wanted to get to the nearest restaurant, go back to Peter's house, whoever's house he was staying at, to the hotel, take a nap, you know. He just preached. I don't know how long he preached. He must have been out there for hours preaching that sermon he preached. And so maybe he was tired. You know, at first I thought maybe he was tired, you know. Maybe he was hungry. Maybe he just wanted to be away from the crowds, and they're following him into town, and he wants to get away from everybody. And then here's this man, you know, Jesus, heal me. And so maybe Jesus was angry at that. But no, if you pay attention to the context, so we look at Matthew, and it tells us there were crowds surrounding him. So what makes Jesus angry in this situation is something I hadn't really thought of, but I made the connection, and it's he's angry at the people. Because Jesus just finished preaching this amazing sermon about how you should treat people and love your enemies and love your neighbors. And here's this man with leprosy who came to Jesus, and the crowds undoubtedly started backing away from the man. They didn't want to be near leprosy. They thought it was contagious. They thought it was deadly. They didn't want to touch him. They didn't want to become unclean. And so maybe he was shouting unclean, and they became afraid. They became scared, and they didn't want anything to do with this, and so they started backing off. Jesus was upset because he looked at the people who he had just poured out everything to and said, and this is how you're going to react. This is how you're going to treat this man when I just told you to love your neighbor? This is how you're going to treat this man when I told you to reach out to those that are in need? This is how you're going to treat him? You're going to back away. You're going to be afraid. And more than likely, maybe he wasn't even angry at the crowds. He was probably angry at the disciples. Jesus was always mad at the disciples because he gave them all the secrets, you know, all the juicy details he didn't tell everybody else. The Bible tells us he taught in parables, so he told a whole bunch of stories. But then after he would tell the crowds the parables, he'd tell the disciples, like in secret. And he's like, all right, I'm going to explain to you what I'm talking about. And so maybe he was angry at the disciples because, look, guys, you're trying to keep him away from me? You're trying to step us back. This man is coming to us in his hour of need, in his moment of desperation, and you want to push him away. That's not what I'm about. That's not what I'm about. See, what we see in this situation, the situation that we're in, is the crowd didn't want to do anything with this leper. Jesus wanted to reach out to him, and this man that was before Jesus believed in him. He took a risk. He said, if you are willing, you can make me clean. That's the interesting thing about the story. He didn't say, a lot of believers, we talk about God healing or praying for people that need healing or stuff. If the Lord is willing. If the Lord is willing. But a lot of times it's more of like a cop-out. We're just saying it because we don't really believe that it's going to happen. You're just like, well, I don't know. It's probably not going to work, but we'll pray. We'll pray, I guess. But this man, he knew. He bowed before Jesus. He threw himself at Jesus' feet, and he said, you can. Will you? Will you? So that sets the context of this story. We have the crowd, and the crowd is backing away from this man. We have the man who is in a position of worship and surrender and desperation, and we have Jesus, who is waiting to see what's going to happen next. He already knows what he's going to do, by the way. Jesus always knew what he was going to do. Always. See, what Jesus did next in the story, his reaction to the rest of it, his first reaction was upset. And he says, all right, you know what? Forget y'all. I don't know if Jesus talked like that, but, forget you guys. I'm going to focus on this man. Because here he is, he's right in front of me, and he needs me, and he's looking for me. And I'm going to respond to him. So Jesus did something that was even worse than just being in the general vicinity of this man. The Bible tells us he touched him. He reached out and touched this man. In those days, in the Jewish culture, to touch anything that was unclean made you unclean. So the people didn't want to touch this man because they were afraid that they were either going to get sick or they would be made spiritually unclean, physically unclean, ceremonial unclean. That means if they touched him, that means they couldn't go worship in the temple. That means they couldn't be around people. They had to go hide out in their home. They had to take a ceremonial bath, and they had to make a sacrifice, and they had to sit in their house for like a day before the next sundown. And then they'd be okay. But Jesus broke the rules in this moment, because to Jesus, love is greater than rules. And so he decided that it was more important that he break tradition and break the regulations because there was something that needed to be done. And so he decided to reach out and touch this man. And he touched him. He said, are you willing? The man comes before Jesus and he says, are you willing to heal me? I know you can, but are you willing? He touches him and he tells him, I am willing. Say that to your neighbor. Jesus said, he is willing. He is willing. He knew. Because Jesus wasn't focused on the traditions or the attitudes of the crowd. He was focused on the need present in front of him. He was focused on the man who was suffering that was in front of him. To him, it didn't matter what people were thinking about him, because undoubtedly there were people in the crowd that were gossiping. Did you see that? He touched that man. Why would he do that? I don't understand. Isn't he a rabbi? He's a man of God. He's a prophet. Why is he touching this man? Doesn't he know the rules? Doesn't he know? Man, we thought this guy was something else, but he's touching this man. Oh, I don't know about this Jesus. Maybe he's not the one we thought he was. Maybe he's not the one we thought he was. See, the problem with the crowd's mentality is that they saw Jesus and they were focused on his authority and his power. They didn't see what was behind that. When they were listening to Jesus, they were like, this man is confident, he is charismatic, he is amazing. None of the teachers talk like this. They weren't thinking about what he actually said, though. Like, there was nothing in that scripture that said they were amazed at his teaching, because of how radical it was or how different it was. They were amazed about how he spoke about love. No, it says they were amazed at his power and authority. They were focused on the wrong thing. And Jesus says, you've got the wrong idea. The power and authority that I have doesn't come from the way I speak or what I'm speaking about. It comes from the heart of what I'm speaking about. It comes from compassion. It comes from love. That's where my power lies. So it doesn't matter that I'm doing the wrong thing in this situation. What matters is this man who is in need. And so I'm going to touch him. I'm going to reach out to him in this moment, and I am going to do something that is going to change his life forever. Because to us and to the people in that day, if we do the wrong thing, say the wrong thing, hang out with the wrong people, or watch the wrong thing, that makes us sinful or unclean. That's the idea we have. And that if we are with the wrong people, that's going to make us bad. That's just going to make us bad. There's some truth to that. Book of Proverbs, there's a proverb in there that says, bad company corrupts good character. And there's some truth to that. There is. But Jesus, you see, had a different idea of things, a different perspective on all of this. He saw that it wasn't about this man's uncleanliness coming onto him. It was about Jesus transferring his cleanliness, his holiness, his healing, his miracle, his power onto this man. He knew that the moment that he touched him, none of the rules and anything mattered because he wasn't going to be unclean anymore. He was going to be completely clean and healed. So he reached out to this man and he says, be clean. Be clean. Because it didn't matter. It didn't matter. Jesus' heart broke for those that were suffering. His heart broke for those who were lost in a world of pride, of selfishness, of hurt and brokenness. That's the kind of world we live in today. And Jesus' heart breaks for those people. Some of us in this story, we're represented by the crowd. Because we see people who are like that. They may not have a skin disease or anything like that. But we see how they dress and it's like, oh no, they don't belong here. We see how they talk and no, that's not Christian, brother. That's not the way a Christian speaks, brother. No. Oh, that lifestyle. No, that's wrong. I can't be around those people. I can't be around them. We look at other people like the people viewed this leper. We see them as outcasts. We see them as people we shouldn't be around or we shouldn't be near because they're going to corrupt us. Instead, we should look at them like Jesus looked at them and say, yeah, they're corrupted, they're broken, they're hurt, they're this, they're that, but that's not going to change me because I am the salt of the earth. I am the light of the world. I am life. And you know what is true about that? It's true of you too. Because Jesus made those claims about himself. He says, I am the light of the world. I am the salt of the earth. I am light in this earth. I am change in this world. But then you know what he did? He turned that back on us. He says, you know what? You are the light of the world. You are life in this world. You are hope in this world. Because I'm not going to be here forever. And when I go, that's your turn. He even went as far as to say, you see all the stuff that I did? You're going to do more. You're going to do more than that. Jesus was looking at us and trying to see if we would catch what he's trying to get at because it wasn't about rules, it wasn't about life, it wasn't about all that. The story that we see in Matthew and Mark and Luke is that Jesus was reaching out to a man in a broken world who was hurting and knew that he could do something about it. He is willing. He is willing. See, we see something deeper in this. If you just read the book of Matthew and you saw that story, it's kind of straightforward, It says there was a crowd, there was a man, Jesus healed him. There we go. That's it. And then I find the last verse in this story very strange. We get a picture of it, a bigger picture of it, though. We look at Mark and it tells us Jesus was angry. We look at Luke and it says this man was covered in leprosy. It gives us a bigger picture of all of this. Like the 3D images we saw before, when you look at them without the glasses, you just see blurry picture. But if you put the glasses on, you see the image clear and full. It comes to life. It starts to move. And so we look at the three stories here, and it gives us a clearer picture of what Jesus was trying to do here. And there was more, because the last verse is such a strange verse, because he tells the man, don't tell anybody. Well, that seems redundant. He is like surrounded by people at this moment. So he's like, don't tell anybody. I don't know what Jesus exactly was thinking. A lot of scholars think a lot of things. And they say that, maybe Jesus had a habit of doing this. He had a habit of telling people, well, don't tell anybody. And some people think it was because he didn't want to draw attention to himself. Because, people didn't like him. They were trying to kill him. And he didn't want to draw attention to himself. I mean, I don't know how you can draw more attention to you than a crowd of thousands of people following you, but I don't know. He tells him, don't tell anybody. And he tells him, instead, I want you to go make the sacrifice that is required of this healing. And I thought this was so strange, but this is still part of my sermon. This is still important to the story, because it wasn't about not telling people. It was about telling the right people. It was about making things right. You see, this man was healed when he came to Jesus, but his life still hadn't been made right yet. What happened next was determined by him. Everything that is a blessing or a healing or a change in us happens because we come to Jesus first. But after that is when the real change starts. He says, now I want you to go and I want you to make the proper sacrifice and present yourself to the priest so that they can restore you into society, so that they can bring you back. Now you can have your home back. Now you can have your life back. Now you can come back into the world and do something greater with it. It wasn't that he wasn't telling the man, don't tell this to anybody. He knew that he was eventually going to tell people what happened. He was aware that this was going to be something that, it's not like Jesus was just saying it to say it. He said, first I want you to make things right. But that's where we get things backward. See, the crowd says you need to make things right before you come to God. He says, you need to make things right before you come to Jesus. You need to be clean before you set foot in the church. I've talked to people, they think that they step in the church building, they're going to burn in flames. I don't know where they get that from. And it's like, well, that's such a strange thing to say. But it's not, because that's how people in their lives who are believers treat them. They treat them as an outcast, and they don't even want them here. But Jesus is saying, all right, to make things all right in order, you got to do this, because now I'm not only going to heal you, I want to restore you. I want to bring you into the right place before me. So God changes you and heals you instantly, but then it's a process to get back. He brings us into this new world. He says, now you're a part of my world. Now I'm going to bring you into what I'm doing in this world. I'm going to tell you eventually to tell people, but first you got to do this. First, you got to do this. See, Jesus was amazing. He was hitting all bases here. He's like, look, I'm going to teach you here right now. To that man, he was teaching him. What the crowd said didn't matter. What it was important is you came to me. You came to me. You believed in me. Not only that, you had trust in that I was going to be able to do the thing that you wanted me to do. You took a risk, because he could have been stoned. Somebody could have just this man is not in the place he's supposed to be in. But Jesus is like, that doesn't matter. You and me right here, that matters. Jesus was focused, and that's the amazing thing about Jesus, is that he wasn't even focused on the crowds anymore. He didn't care about them. Jesus wasn't about crowds. We want to fill this church up with people, but Jesus wasn't about crowds. He was about the individual and seeing that they had a relationship with him, that he restored them, that he made things right. See, Jesus looked at this man, and when he said, I am willing, he didn't just say, I am willing to heal you. He said, you know what I'm willing to do? I'm willing to heal you. I'm willing to bring you into my family. I'm willing to restore you. I'm willing to change your life in this moment for the better. It's not going to be the same anymore. You're not going to be outcast anymore, because you are welcome here with me. You are welcome here with me. And I'm almost done here. Whew. See, this whole story is key. The whole main key phrase in this story is what Jesus said, I am willing. I am willing. See, that's Jesus. He's willing, always, ready, listening, waiting for the right people. It's not even the right people. It's the people who will take the risk and stand up and say, Jesus, I need you. Because when no one else When you feel like no one else is willing to love you, He is willing. When you feel like no one supports you, He is willing. When no one seems to be helping you find your way and you feel lost in this world, He is willing. He is reaching out to us today and telling us He is willing. You know, it doesn't matter if you've been a believer for a long time, because sometimes we get things messed up. The longer we're a believer, the easier it is for us to get things mixed up. We get focused more on being at church or being a Christian and doing the right things instead of actually paying attention to what Jesus is saying to us. Because there's a lot of people in this world that God is calling us to reach out to. And they're standing in front of us today, asking us, I know you can help. Are you willing? Unfortunately, a lot of people in this world, a lot of believers in this world today are standing in front of the people in need and they're asking for help, and they turn them away. And tell them, no, I'm not willing. You're not like me. So no. They get it wrong. They focus on the scriptures that say, take care of the believers first. Yeah, it says take care of the believers first. But then remember, you got to take care of everybody else too. We have a chance and we have an opportunity today to stand in front of a world that is hurting and broken and says, here we are willing. Jesus was willing and so are we.